You're listening to All Things 3D, where we talk about the world of fabricating, designing, and capturing in the third dimension.
What a beautiful day to fly to San Francisco. We boarded the plane in Düsseldorf, and then after we took off, there was a super weird smell in the cabin, and we had to do an emergency landing in Cologne. Actually, where we started this morning, we took the train from Cologne to Düsseldorf, boarded the plane, took off in Düsseldorf, landed in Cologne again. So now we're in Cologne. We can't fly to San Francisco today. There are not enough planes. So now we're taking a bus back to Düsseldorf to stay in a hotel and try again tomorrow.
Oh.
As it turns out, we are not going to stay in a hotel in Düsseldorf. We all have to go home, whatever that means. I mean, I live in Cologne, it's easy for me, but there are a lot of people who come from far away. Anyway, so we all have to go home on our own expenses, spend the night, and try again tomorrow. Man. All right, so we finally have our bags, and we're now in a cab on our way home again. It's now 8. We left at 11 in the morning. It's 8 p.m. It took us 4 hours to get our bags back, and let's just hope we can fly tomorrow. Also, remember this morning when I said it was a beautiful day to fly to San Francisco? That was a lie. Second try to make it to San Francisco. We are back at the airport. Please, Air Berlin, take us to San Francisco today. Good morning, guys. What a beautiful weather. What a beautiful day. We're finally in San Francisco. Made it safe. We had a great trip. It was all good. Now we're here, and it's Friday morning, and I'm actually on my way to test it. It's now Tuesday. We made a quick jump in time. After I went to test it last Friday, Norm introduced me to everybody and showed me around the tested headquarters. And then we went to Adam's cave where I met Adam, and we recorded the Still Untitled podcast together with Norm and Simone, who was there via Skype because unfortunately she's in Sweden right now. And we were actually in the cathedral when we thought, you know, we could probably build this pussy grass bag machine with a mouse trap. And
in a cathedral, you
yeah,
came up with
yeah,
this.
in the Cologne Cathedral. This. Yeah, it was really, it was a really cool moment. Yeah.
It was very divine. It was very divine. We were like, oh, we need.
Saturday and Sunday, Lucy and I went around the city and did all the touristy stuff.
Run through this
Yesterday
real quick
was
so
in
we can get to
MakerFaire once again. With me, it was the other way around. I quit my job before I started YouTube because it was so that is so cool. And it has a pencil egg. Very cool. I'm very impressed with this. I'm right now outing as a complete unprofessional because my camera died at the MakerFaire. So I'm actually the one thing I came to California for. My camera died and I didn't take any footage of it. But still, we're at this Inventables thing. They invited us for pizza and beers. We're hanging out with all the cool kids. There they are. But now we're heading to a different event from Rockler and Lincoln, and I hope the sound quality is not as bad as I think it might be.
You're here. Yes. This guy right here.
Yeah, it's way better.
Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Mike. Hey, yeah, I must have missed her, but I probably missed a lot of things this year. You know, only got one day, the Saturday at the MakerFaire this year, and it was really awesome. But there was like so much going on. Obviously, there's a lot of the usual, but there was some incredible projects there. Yeah, so welcome everybody to 3D in Review.
So that
3D.
was LoRa Kampf, all the way from the Netherlands to visit. Obviously, she has about 166,000 followers, so she must be a thing in Europe, and obviously coming to the United States to head to the world's largest MakerFaire. I assume it's still the world's largest. I don't know if New York has passed it yet. I think it's a pretty cool thing. And obviously, I didn't get a chance to see it, but you did. And I was hoping that you would have a lot to show us, maybe some show and tell, maybe some images. So I'll hand it over to you and give us your spin.
Yeah, so yeah, this year, you know, there's always so much. I love the talks. I love to, you know, obviously the normal walk around. I usually go and see Massimo, the forefather of Arduino. He comes every year and he speaks and kind of tells what's on the forefront in the Arduino world, which I like to keep up to speed in that. He unveiled some really unique products that they're kind of working on. They haven't actually put them even officially on their website yet. I did find one write-up, and we'll get into that. But yeah, there was some, you know, you can actually go over to the Instagram page, and I put a link in the show notes here. But yeah, there's like the normal, like a lot of like cosplay stuff and kind of, you know, really cool build outs. They had a huge zoetrope.
Someone's got a big heart.
Yeah, this zoetrope is like, you know, a pretty cool. You could see like a diver diving, but this thing was like the size of a carousel. They had a massive Tesla coil as usual. They had this gigantic bot that they were punching a Prius that was hanging from a crane with. They couldn't quite get it working perfect. They had these people were riding around this gigantic ant thing. But like all kinds of ingenuity, you know, always at the MakerFaire. Some really great, just cool stuff to see. Always unique makers. But so I'll just run through some of the highlights that I saw.
So I don't know if you checked out our theme, but you know, it's the Modern Makers Toolkit, and obviously the place to find out where you can kind of assemble your toolkit would be at the show that you went to. So kind of keep that in mind as you're going through this.
Yeah, So, you know, I've been looking at this Prusa i3. Obviously everybody's following. It's the hot item. It's the hot printer to have right now. It just won 3 of the main categories for Make Magazine's 3D printer shootout last year. Or I think it comes out in January. The shootout came out in January. It was a wrap up for last year, and they have announced an upgrade that is pretty interesting. It's an upgrade available to all Mark II and Mark IIs owners that are out there. And so here's some footage from the MakerFaire that's right up on Tested, of some really cool machines running around. And I can fast forward here. So what this upgrade lets the i3 Mark II do is print 4 colors under one nozzle and without any head alignment, and it does it with this like really unique way. And they just use basically a what do you call it, like an ooze shield you print a secondary piece, and that just primes the nozzle, and then it's ready to go. So it's just an upgrade that's like, it's a 3D printable upgrade that's available for anybody that owns, and they already have it working pretty much perfect. And they were showing off, they were showing this off. I thought it was really, really neat. You can also print support material. You can print combinations of almost any material, and up to 4 different things. So I'm definitely going to be jumping on the bandwagon here and probably scooping up one, trying to get one of these printers as quick as possible, and also getting that upgrade, because it not only does it have mesh bed leveling and all the latest, all metal hot end, the PEI has this really unique build surface that allows, keeps a constant temperature, but it also prints these models, these beautiful models, like very, very
wow, that's
ultra,
pretty good.
ultra definition and multicolor. So they had some really cool models they were showing off. I don't know if you saw that little benchy back there.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, the little mini benchy, but it was multicolor, and yeah. So
what's the price on this?
So the kit, the fully assembled, the printer's $8.99, and then the upgrade is just something that you 3D print. So the files are readily available, and I don't think there's really very much other than those Bowden and maybe some mounts. Oh, and obviously you need stepper motors, or you need some extra extruders. So I don't know if they have that up on their website quite yet. They said they were running a little behind, so they just wanted to get it ready to show it off, and then they were going to put it on the website. So here he's showing off like the ooze shield that they build to prime the nozzle. So yeah, so that was definitely a highlight. I really enjoyed watching, going up and seeing the Prusa, and all the 3D printing is amazing. And then obviously update from Massimo. So on the Arduino camp, there was some cool updates. One is the Maker 1000, which is basically the Arduino Zero packed with a Wi-Fi shield. So now the biggest thing, and Massimo, you could tell he was a little tired. Obviously, he travels all the way from Italy just to give the talk at MakerFaire, and his talk was a little sleepy, because I think he was a little sleepy, but there were some nuggets of information kind of hidden in there. I don't think a lot of people were even paying attention. I think a lot of people just went into the room just to have a seat, and I don't even know if many people even understand what Arduino is that go to the talks. Obviously there's some people, but that was one of, I think he was stressing how, wireless connectivity to the Internet of Things devices is becoming a real thing. They had this Arduino Primo, which is a new board. So it's got the Nordic NRF52 processor, but what this one does is this has an NFC and Bluetooth Smart on it. So it has an
NFC reader on it?
It has an NFC reader on it.
Wow.
Built on. So that's the new Arduino Primo that has NFC capability. And then this one, they haven't even put on their website, and you can't even buy them yet. I think they had them, the developer kits, you could buy them, but the chipset, they said they still might change it a little bit. This is the new Arduino LoRa gateway and node shields that they have. So it's basically, one of them is like an Arduino TIN that they call the gateway shield. So what that does is and LoRa is this new standard, and you can go on and look at what LoRa is. LoRa is essentially this new kind of proprietary chirp spread spectrum radio modulation technology and it's basically like it's like a low power wireless connection that you can do, or that creates a wide area network, and it can go like 10 kilometers or more with line of sight. So it's for super long range, and it's to transmit data with low power. So what you do is you have one of these gateway shields, and then you have all these node shields that can link up to the gateway shield. So you can have a bunch of these little shields, and you know, their plan is to make them fairly inexpensive. They also put pro connectors on these to hook up your, you know, different, all kinds of different sensors or whatever you want to hook up, but it'll communicate. So this is like if you had internet down, you know, half a mile away from where you needed to gather data, you wouldn't necessarily be able to have internet connectivity. So you wouldn't be able to use a Maker 1000 or one of the Wi-Fi enabled ones, but you could potentially use this. So kind of interesting. I thought that was like a little secret thing that not many people were even paying attention to. But the LoRa Shield, I think, is going to be a big deal, especially when you have all these people now are kind of experimenting now for mesh nets, right? So that's kind of the buzzword right now that you're hearing a lot. Silicon Valley, even the show Silicon Valley even is touching on it, but mesh nets are becoming a necessity because of obviously net neutrality is an ongoing political issue, you know, internet freedom, censorship, surveillance, all those things. I think this whole LoRa thing and other platforms like it are going to help contribute to kind of like our next mesh net internet that's, you know, maybe a secondary or a fallback internet, or maybe it's just the next internet. Who knows? So that was pretty cool. And yeah, and you know, there was a whole lot more. I can't possibly cover the whole thing. Robots galore.
No, we want you to cover the whole thing.
Yeah,
come on,
yeah.
you got 30 seconds. Finish
I'll
it
tell
off.
you, the next year you gotta go. Friday's really actually worth it because Saturday is absolute madhouse. So you have about an hour window before the real crowd hits. You have about an hour, and then it's a madhouse, and it's just wall to wall. The main tent where most of the 3D printing and the CNCs are, that's what everybody really wants to see right now because it's a hot thing, and it's wall to wall people. So it's like walking like this, and you're just kind of like in line next. You have a person here, and it's impossible to. I mean, there was a lot of stuff that I missed. But it was really fun. We had a good time.
I'm glad to hear that. And obviously, you brought your nephews, right?
Yep, nephews came, and they always. I mean, they loved it. They really, really love it, and part of my enjoyment comes from watching them get into these things. We did they have, what I love about the MakerFaire is they actually have, and they're free, I mean free with your admission, they have these big tents where you can, and you get this wristband when you come in that lets you do activities. You sign a liability waiver, and one of the activities we did with the nephews was a soldering workshop. So they give you a little maker pin thing. Google sponsors it, and you sit down, and the little kit comes with an LED, a battery, and like a button thing that you solder in. And so it's a pin. So you solder the little thing together, you solder it all together, and it teaches you, and there's people that help you, and there's soldering irons there, and you solder it all together. And then you have a little button, a little souvenir that's a little maker button that has a flashing, blinking, multicolor LED that's changing colors. And I think mine's still at home blinking from last weekend.
I wouldn't be surprised.
So it was really fun. So and you know what? It was like they already have some soldering experience, but it was a really good workshop because it's like then you're working and you're getting, you know, what's cool about that is, you know, you can't mess up because it's like a little free thing that's just an LED. It's really simple, basic. It's about as good of a soldering workshop as you could ever have.
So let me go back 30 years. Actually, maybe even be longer now. So as you know, I was in the Air Force. So I went in, enlisted, and I had some basic training, and then I went into basic electronics. Now I had already had about 2 or 3 years of electronic experience, so it was like snoozeville. But I remember our soldering class, because one of the days was specifically made for that. You had to actually build back then an LED board that blinked. Now, obviously, what you guys built versus what I built, this was probably what, dime, quarter the size that you made versus mine, which was about I don't know, a much larger object, had larger capacitors, had the big LEDs, not the little tiny ones. So yeah, a different time. But you know, on that topic, Chris, our theme is Modern Maker's Toolkit, and obviously the epicenter has been the San Mateo. What would you put in your toolkit as a modern maker, and one that's actually making money doing it? You know, I have some ideas, but what do you want to bring to the table?
What would I put in my modern maker's toolkit?
Yeah.
Knowledge.
Yeah.
So learn the tools. The best place to start is, if you want to build things, CAD is a really useful tool to me. So get on, whether it's Onshape, Fusion 360, whatever it is, learn how to draw on the computer, because planning is everything, right? So like being able to make a plan before you actually start making something is, you don't have to plan it all out, but when you're making things out of expensive metal and all these things, it's not Play-Doh. It's not cheap like Play-Doh. So a lot of times it makes sense to have your dimensions already done, and a lot of your figuring already done.
Mm-hmm.
So I think CAD is probably the most useful tool that I can say, because it's either cheap or free now for most people. You can go Onshape and you can do you can make public your files, as long as they're public. You don't mind your files being public, you can use it free. Fusion 360 for hobbyists and makers at home, tinkerers, it's free.
Well, and actually small businesses, I can't remember what I think it's, if you make less than 20,000, it's also free. So
there
all
you
right,
go.
So that's the design portion of it. Now that's for physical designs. How do you get those into the real world? What would you suggest?
And then a quality 3D printer. You do get what you pay for. Monoprice has one printer that is, I think it's like $299. So I think for about $300 you can really get into it and be satisfied with the results. Obviously, you're not going to be able to do all the materials, and it's not going to be the same as getting something for $799 that you'd be getting from Prusa Research, or even $3,500 from Ultimaker. There's a different, there's different grades of machines, but I think the Monoprice Select printers, or the Monoprice, there's the one that's $299. I think for about $300 you can get started with a pretty decent printer and make some decent
there's
prints.
a few in that price range, and obviously
Yeah.
if you plan to do this, well, if you've been listening to our show, go back and listen to some of the episodes. The other thing to keep in mind is, don't forget the traditional tools. If you learn some woodworking, learn some metalworking, actually, if you've got a, what do they call them? Now I've already forgotten the name, a maker shop in your area, head out to it. They've got a lot of those tools that you can rent and get an idea before spending a lot of money.
Blows me away is, so up until just recently, we didn't have an actual Harbor Freight location. It was all mail order, or you had to drive pretty far away to go to one. And I've ordered through their catalog for years, and a lot of it is pretty damn good. It's like really cheap, so much cheaper than anywhere else. And I mean, for how much I'm going to use some of these tools, like, it's like literally a tenth the price when you go to Harbor Freight versus some of the other like big box store like Home Depot or something for the same tool. But we got one down in San Luis Obispo. We got a Harbor Freight, and I went in there the other day, and it's a maker's mecca. It is. It's unbelievable.
Where's it at?
San Luis Obispo.
Wow.
And I mean, they've got everything from 10-ton presses to generators to solar stuff that you can toy around with. It's like a candy store for makers, because they've got all the tools. If you want to play with solar, if you want to play with if you need a drill, you're not going to be out several $100. And yeah, you might not get the wireless drill. You can get a wireless drill. I think they have wireless drills starting at like $20, So it's a cheap and easy way for a few $100. I would say you could build a complete toolkit for like well under $500. at Harbor Freight, you could build a pretty decent maker kit with soldering irons, probably
Now,
under,
you
even under
mentioned
$100.
the key there, a soldering iron, and your nephews had some training over the weekend. Well, that's important too, is the electronic perspective. And, again, dating myself, years ago, to actually create something that you can now pick up for $10, an Arduino, um, we didn't have such a thing. You basically had to breadboard the whole thing, including the chip. It's a lot more work. Now kids have it a little easier, but they can make more with it. And obviously with the internet, which again, dating myself, really didn't exist back when, unless you thought of Genie and CompuServe as internet. But it went a long way for what I needed to be done. But essentially, kids today have all the tools, and it's not just say kids. If you want to get started as an adult in Maker, I mean, all the tools are there. Some of the sites that I would head out to is Adafruit. What's another one? DigiKey, if you're into electronics.
This is the most important tool in my office, is high quality calipers. You don't need high quality, but it makes a big difference, especially when we get into the topic that I'm going to talk about in a little while during the Print Whisperer. But calipers, absolutely. I use my calipers 24 or more times per day, so they're very important for my job.
For anybody, if you're trying to convert something from the tangible room, and that's another item. 3D scanners are becoming less expensive. They're becoming better. I think that should be added to a toolkit, and I will explain a little bit later and kind of give some results on my VR home remodel. We're finally done. So we'll talk about that. Okay, so let's get into our first news item, and this is actually a blast from the past. This is, they actually reached out to me, 3D Hubs, and said, hey, your section on 3D printing is a little outdated. And I said, well, actually, slow 3D creators is going away. But thank you. And I thought we'd give them a shout out. I guess you're familiar with 3D Hubs. Yes,
oh, yeah.
Chris?
Yeah, I do a little bit of work through 3D Hubs.
Yeah. And so he sent me this link, and it's how to design parts for your FDM 3D printing. And it kind of goes through, and a lot of things we've talked about on the show, but this is a nice page to kind of go back and review, and, got some good tips out there, maybe something you didn't know already. And obviously they've got some nice little videos to go along with it. 3D Hubs, if I remember correctly, is a place that you can sign up if you're 3D fabricating and become part of a hub or network that can be used for people who don't have a 3D printer. Is that correct, Chris?
Yeah. I would say it's one sales funnel. So what it does is a lot of people do go to 3D Hubs. It's a good place to shop pricing. But it's also very mixed bag of what you're going to get, because a lot of times you're working with a guy out of his garage. Nothing wrong with that. Is like garage inventors a lot of times can give you better service than a big corporation. So I like to be somewhere halfway in between a big Shapeways and a garage or, but yeah, a lot of times they aren't necessarily brick and mortars. They're some guy at their house printing, which is great. They have an open printer and they post it on 3D Hubs, and it's kind of like it's a great way for people to have access to cheap 3D printing.
Totally agree with you. In fact, I'm probably going to reach out now that I live in a larger community. Obviously, some of these 3D hubs would be here in Portland. And
I'm sure there's thousands in Portland.
Yep. All right. So, that's a little shout out to them. And thank you for reminding me to update information. Sadly, I'm getting out of the Service Bureau, but obviously our co-host, Chris, could probably review it and maybe adds a few of his own little tips to you, since he does this on a day-to-day basis. And he helped me out again. He beat out Shapeways. One of the things that's nice about working with some independents is that if you need something really fast, sometimes, Shapeways and some of the larger ones can't do it, or the price becomes exorbitant. Thank you again, Chris. I should have something that I'm going to talk about a little bit later I don't know what I'm going to call it, but essentially it's a housing for the Zoom H2N that you can put your Gear 360 or any other type of 360 camera on top of to get ambisonic sound. And I talked about it last week, and I'm going to go ahead and talk about it again this week. Some new tools, not new tools, but a different set of tools that Google suggests with their jump system. And then I'm also going to talk about how you can use spatial audio in Unity as well as Unreal. There are actually plugins. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. What's the next news item, Chris?
Making metal. This was awesome. We got to watch a little bit of this. This guy did a really good job on this video. I never really knew him. Infosmercial is his channel on YouTube, and he shows, this is incredible actually. He 3D prints a Star Wars helmet, and then he proceeds to show how to copper and nickel plate it, electroplate it, using a brush-on plating technique, which I really can't wait to try now. Not with the Star Wars helmet, but with maybe something
with other items.
Yeah. So what he does is he prints, this is it printed here out of just a standard like PLA. And he has this very comical video, and I recommend, I put it in the show notes. Anybody that wants to get in this, go out and watch it. It's really good. But what he does is he sprays it with this, it's MG Chemicals Super Shield. It's a nickel conductive coating. So he sprays his PLA, and that makes it so it's prepped for electroplating. And then he touches it up with another little acetone mixture he mixes up with this. Then he gets into the nitty gritty, and this is unbelievable. So he buys this kit from Caswell, which is a plug and plate, they call it, copper electroplating, and it comes with everything you need. And I'll actually try to add a link to the actual product, because I'm gonna actually go buy this. And what he does is, so you tie the electrode up, because obviously part of electroplating is you have to have the surface be electrified. So then he starts brushing on.
A charge.
Yeah, so you have to have a charge. So then he dips the chemical into the chemical, and he starts electroplating. And he goes around, and look at this. He electroplates the whole thing copper. It looks so gorgeous. But then he takes it one step further and does what one of my clients does. One of my clients loves this Mother's mag wheel polish. And what he does is he just takes a fine grit sandpaper, does a little, and then he takes this mag wheel polish and he just polishes it up slowly but surely. I mean, he spent hours making this video, but look at the sheen on this. I mean, it's incredible. And so he goes over, he uses the mag wheel polish, really polishes the whole thing up, and look at that thing. It's just a gorgeous, he really does a gorgeous job, but he wants to take it one step further. And so he buys a nickel solution as well to burnish the top, and he goes over the whole thing after he's done copper, and he does like this experimental, and then here it is, the finished product. Absolutely beautiful model, plated. So go check it out. Making Metal Electroplating a 3D printed Star Wars helmet is on YouTube. You can check it out, and I love it.
That's super cool. Now I'm gonna have to go get one. Okay, let's move on to the next item here. And God, do you remember this guy?
Of course, I remember this guy.
Bree Pettis?
Yeah, he's one of the innovators of our time.
He's moved on, and he's coming out with, I don't know what they call it, the MakerBot, but it is a CNC. You know, you were kind of talking about there were a ton of CNCs at the MakerFaire. I've seen a few. So his acquisition of Other Machine Company, a rapid prototyping company.
Oh, it's Other Machines. We met these guys at the VR. Yep. Yeah. Oh, he acquired that company?
Yeah, so let me jump back to
they make an incredible product too. Very rigid, small CNC machine. So wow, that's a smart move on his part. I mean, because he probably had some cash that he was sitting on after the whole MakerFaire selling to Stratasys. I'm sure he still has plenty of cash left over.
Yeah, it's not a very large unit, but I can't remember what the
But the
price
people behind
is.
it were very bright.
Yep. Yeah, I met them in 2015 at the MakerFaire. So it's kind of cool that he bought them out. And here we show an actual MakerBot, and to the left is the little CNC. And why don't you kind of fill us in a little bit? What's the difference between a CNC and an FDM printer?
Well, so a CNC has a mill, like a tool on the end. It's subtractive manufacturing versus additive manufacturing. So with 3D printing, it's extruding hot plastic and depositing it, and it's additive. So you're actually building the material from nothing. Subtractive manufacturing, you start with a piece of stock like steel or aluminum or metal or wood or whatever you want, nylon. You can even do plastic, and a bit comes down, or a mill comes down, and it mills out the piece, and then it actually subtracts, it chips away the material and removes material away, and then you're left with a finished product that way. So it's subtractive versus additive.
Now, can you use the same code for each, or are they different?
No. And so with 3D printing, additive manufacturing, you have slicers that kind of generate the tool path that the printer is going to make. With mills or subtractive manufacturing, you have something called CAM, and it's usually it's a bridge between your CAD software and the mill itself. They still run off G code. Everything runs off G code, just like 3D printers run off G code, and most of the mills run off of G code, or CNCs run off G code.
Is kind of the commands that tell you where you need to be.
Yeah, it tells it X, Y, Z, or what the motors need to be doing. Essentially, it tells it you need to go over here, and how fast you need to go over there. So with subtractive, you have CAM software, because there's all these different CAM operations that you can do, and you can use different bits, and some CNCs can do multi-axis, so it can go in at an angle. It's not just X, Y, Z. It can actually go in at an angle. You can do weird cuts, but it's really good for metal. So CNC is used if you want to make metal parts. Obviously, 3D
molds.
printing, you can, or molds. Yeah. So there's a lot of uses for CNC. Subtractive is definitely it's especially cost effective still. It really beats out 3D printing when you're doing large format parts, because usually you can buy a big piece of plastic stock for cheaper than you could 3D print it, because you're talking about spools and spools of material, and it would be a lot faster typically for large, as long as the operations are minimal. So
yeah, one of my experiences, if you remember, we had Dr. Dan Kopp, a local dentist in your area. We went through on the process of using SLA versus the standard methods, which was a CNC-based process to, in this case, create my teeth based upon a scan that he created. And it was many times faster, and sadly, or not sadly, at that particular point, because this was the Form 1, the quality seemed better, but it was like 10 times faster. So it was a much better product. And now, obviously, these are not cheap in a Form 1, which at that time was $3,500 versus a $10,000 to $15,000 piece of equipment. Obviously, there's a difference there. And as we talked about before, SLA has kind of moved up in the dental world, and we're starting to see lower pricing, as well as with the Form 2, or is it the Form 3 now? I can't remember. They also have materials now for either one, burning them out, so you create a mold from it, or actually, what do you want to call it, FDA approved materials, so that you can directly print something and put it to use. But I just thought I'd kind of mention that. I think CNC is something that I've been looking at, so I'm going to have to take a look at this. It's small and compact, and it's reasonably priced. I think it's less than $1,000, if I remember correctly. Okay, Chris, what's our next item? And let's kind of run through this a little quicker.
Well, 3D in medicine, you have You have this one. I think we covered this one last week.
Okay. Which one? Is that mine or yours?
Yours about mice.
Okay. Well, let me jump into that one. I don't think I did. Let me find my mouse here. Okay.
No,
So,
I did.
let's see. We have one in architecture first. So this is in Berkeley News, and I'll jump to my screen here. So there's a University of California Botanical Gardens, and with hundreds of birds' nests, and I guess they wanted to 3D fabricate, and I've got a little video to go along with that. So let me find that video, and we can play it.
Oh my Lord.
So that's pretty interesting. Essentially, they 3D printed the, what do you want to call it, the skeleton or the framework, and then using hemp, created the outer lacing to create that large bird's nest that they now have residing in the Berkeley Botanical Gardens. So I thought that was pretty cool and another application. Now, they said they used wood filament. Have you ever used wood filament?
Yeah, I have. Timber fill. It's wood.
Is it actually, I mean, is there a binder? Is it a plastic binder? Or is it all?
Yeah, it's plastic with wood. It's like I think it's PLA with like particle board fibers in it. It looks like wood.
Well,
I mean, it has wood in it, I guess.
Well, that's more than likely. I don't think they identify exactly what type of wood printing they use, but I'm assuming it's probably similar.
Yeah,
to that,
I don't really know wood that melts.
Yeah,
you know?
I don't either. So yes, I think it's some type of wood fiber impregnated in a PLA. It's extruded, creating the framework. Let me jump back to the image, and then they used another type of device to actually loop it. So I didn't catch that, what that device is, but they created the pattern of hemp material, and then all of these are pieced together to create what you see there. So I thought that was pretty cool. So more in the show notes if you want to know more about it, or if you're in that area of Berkeley and want to go out and take a look at it, highly recommended. But let's move on to the next item while we're here. So yes, from science.org, I retrieved this article, and essentially 3D printing ovaries. So they printed it out of a gelatin material, an ovary, so that the egg can be implanted and provide or restore fertility in mice, and they were very successful with it. And you know, I'm not going to get into much on that, other than we're seeing a lot of this now where we're using biologic materials, creating frameworks, and then using them kind of like a framework to further create growth. In this case, actually create mice. And I assume that they were born. 3 of the female gave birth to healthy litters. Wow. So yeah, we're getting close to those days where we'll have little children growing in these actually, I think there's an article, and I didn't have time to find it, that they actually have an artificial womb for humans now. But don't hold me to that. I'll find the article, but I don't know if that was 3D fabricated. But yeah, pretty soon we are living. But you know, if you remember, what was it, 2001 Space Odyssey? You know, that was like 16 years ago. We're still not up in space, so but we still have a long way to go, but we're actually living in those times, I guess. All right, Chris, what do you got going on? Next item.
Yeah, so this is into our Scanner Darkly section. This is from 2 Minute Papers. This guy really finds some great stuff. This is a paper from Depth Images that is entitled AI Learns Geometric Descriptors, and it is you can watch the video. I put it in the show notes, of course, and this is a neural net that looks at local geometry and 3D scans. And what normally you do, combine different 3D scans from different angles to make a 3D scape, is you have to physically pick out descriptors. So like a human still is required to pick out descriptors by hand, identify areas that match, because a lot of times the computer has a really hard time doing that. Well, in this case, what they've done is they've built a neural net that actually can identify descriptors better than, and it can actually reconstruct 3D scans and do a lot better job. So they have some examples here as the paper or as the video kind of goes on. They have some case studies about traditional, and even just compared to humans, it's already, because neural nets have such a high amount of processing power, it can do a lot better job than even a human, and it can actually make 3D scans from way crazier angles. It can actually reconstruct a room from a much, I guess, a higher variance in scans, so like than a human could do. So like here's the normal NSAC, and so here it is showing 3D match. This is theirs down below, and they're showing some different they're just showing some different matching here that the computer's doing. So, and obviously it becomes a lot more obvious, like they show there, with when you have like 6 scans that you want to combine, or if you have multiple objects that don't match at all, having the computer or the AI be able to figure out how the objects line up, and it'll say, hey, no, they don't line up, or yep, we found a way to line up.
So to kind of bring this home a little bit, if you're familiar with all the conversations I've had with the occipital structure sensor, they use the RGBD technique, and I would not be surprised if something like this is already being used. Oops, that was with their. We've covered it before, their ability to scan full rooms and then piece the pieces together in real time. So they've got some pretty good algorithms. I don't know if they're using this, but obviously there are some strengths in the techniques they're using as well as this in order to take dissimilar objects and ensure they match correctly without any human intervention.
Yeah,
so,
like neural nets are just an amazing way to, they're definitely, there's a ton of machine learning effort going into neural nets right now. So,
well, yeah, not surprised. With processing so cheap, developing neural networks is obviously much easier to do. And one of the things that Google I/O was, and I can't think of the name of it, but they've got their own processor units now that they're building up.
That's right. The TPU.
Yeah.
TPU, yeah.
Tesla. Is it I want to say Tesla.
There's some interesting talks from that Google I/O. I haven't watched all of them.
Well,
Mike must have cut out. Are you still there, Mike? Well, Mike's dropped out, but I'm still here. And I guess I could touch on some VR. Yeah, because there was actually a Neil deGrasse Tyson presents a new Space Odyssey game that allows you to explore in space. I don't know too much about it, but it is going to have VR be playable in the Oculus or other VR. And there's Mike. He's coming back.
Yeah, that was good old Google. If you use two-part authentication, they don't obviously care when they disrupt you, like in the middle of your show, in order to ask for your authentication. So that's
Well,
a little disappointing.
I jumped right into my VR item, and
Okay.
my VR
Well,
was,
actually, I had a scan item, and I'll get through it real quick. So behind me, this article from Spar 3D, and how they used. Well, I don't know if they actually identify the scanner unit, but they scanned the world's largest building. Now, this was a building back in the 1800s, but it's a Gothic church in Northern Europe. And the approach they took in order to scan it, the imager is a 501 or 5010C. And essentially, as you can see there, they mounted it on poles and scanned it from above. And this was the final result of that. You can go ahead and read further on it, but here you go. Here's the point cloud.
wow,
Impressive, huh?
very impressive. Holy
So
crap.
if you're wondering why would you spend the time to do something like that, well, from my understanding, working with a architectural firm, is you're familiar with Hearst Castle, right, Chris? You live in that area.
Of course.
But Hearst Castle, we've had a few earthquakes, and they wanted to check out structural damage, so they used a LiDAR system in order to scan it to determine that. So obviously, to get things that are high, like in Hearst Castle, you have to be on scaffolds or large ladders in order to reach that. But something this tall, they essentially created a structure that they could then push it, as they show in this image here, from above down, and then they inverted it, and then they just reassembled it. And they said these scans pretty much exceeded or almost exceeded the capacity of matching all the cloud points, which from my experience, which is what, almost now 15 years, back then, cloud point manipulation was very intensive and memory intensive. So I would not be surprised, but the results can be amazing. And then you can go through that and then turn that into a 3D model. And yeah, so very interesting. Obviously, we're using techniques like this. Gosh, was it been about 3 years? We had, what was the name of the group that's gone around and scanned monuments and so forth? And we learned that one of the scans was funded by a European company and couldn't get access to it, Mount Rushmore. Can't think of them right now. They're based out of San Francisco, but we should revisit them in the future. Okay, so now, Chris, you may head out to your...
Yeah, I already touched on it. The Neil deGrasse Tyson Presents Space Odyssey, which is also going to be available here in 17 days. And it's going to be also available in virtual reality for virtual reality missions. It's a space exploration game where you're on board some sort of space station and exploring around space. So it's a science discovery game, definitely targeted at the, anyone. E for everyone.
E for everyone. That's a good one. Very
yeah.
cool. So I'll have to check that out. Okay, well, let's move into what I forgot in last week's talk about Google I/O. And we talked about that other product. What was it called? No, I can't think of the name now. But essentially, their new process of taking high resolution 3D models and then converting that into a lower resolution version without losing the quality. I can't think of the name now. It'll come to me a little bit later. But this was the other thing that was introduced, was Daydream 2.0. Sadly, it's still not available to people like myself, but it's called Euphrates, and it will be for phones as well as those standalone VR headsets that we mentioned last week. So what is new in this version? Well, essentially, they'll have a new look as far as their interface, which you look at, which I'm all for. I found that the current version was a little bit cumbersome, but featured kind of things. Obviously this isn't cemented, but some of the new features doesn't look too much different. And for the most part, it works pretty good. But the fact is you can bring the popcorn. Obviously, I would think that's some kind of video or the YouTube center. Now, remember, one of the things that they talked about, let's see where it's at. Okay, so here's the home screen again, is a couple of things. One, and we're going to show a little demo here. I've been using the Chromecast feature to demo a lot of my Daydream and Google Cardboard items, and they work fairly well. But now you'll be able to do it as a single item. In the past, as you'll see in a little bit, I still get the dual screen. Now it'll give me a single screen that I can Chromecast out so your audience can see what you're doing. I think that's a great step forward. I wish I had it now for the demo I'm going to be giving a little bit later. But yeah, I think that's a great little feature. Also, what else do we have? There's some new Google Design best practice videos out there. One of them I just watched is pretty cool. That talks about a few things, and I can show that a little bit later. The other thing I think we touched on a little bit is the new YouTube app that will allow multiple people to watch the same thing and converse. So we're back to the point where we're creating our own little theaters where we can invite people, or couch. Let's call it the virtual couch. And little avatar. So, Chris and I could watch the same video and chat while we're doing it. So obviously they're trying to bring in integration and keep it from being such an isolating experience. Surratt, that's what it was. We talked about that already last week. I have some theories on this, but until I find more information, I won't release them. But I'm really, really looking forward to that. But some of the other things that were mentioned is that obviously the Snapdragon 835 will be supported. The Vulkan Graphics API. Now, this is a big one, and it's something that I've talked about a lot. The Vulkan Graphics allows a step above what we're using right now is OpenGL. It works basically directly with the ARM Mali G71 or other processor GPUs, and one of its main strength is doing thousands of instances without any real burden on the GPU. I've played with it already. NVIDIA has had a version of this for some time, and it really can push the performance of video, and something that really needs to be brought into the mobile market in order to improve it. So I'm looking forward to that. Multi-process compositing in VR, that's something that'll be exciting. And then, as we talked about before, is spatial audio now being embedded in Unity and Unreal. This is something that's already there. I don't know what this will offer, and then better magnetometer and calibration, as well as gyroscope drift. This is still a little bit of an issue depending on the device. I think this has to do when they get warmer, I wouldn't say the calibration, but you get some drift. And so having this so that it corrects for it, so that you're not constantly having to adjust for it, because I found some phones are worse than others. Not so much with the Pixel L. It's pretty stable, but the fact is that they're offering better control. That I think is a big pro. So these are things that I'm really looking forward to. I don't know when this will be available. I can get the beta of, they just call it O right now. Some people think it's going to be Android Oreo, but who knows? But right now it's Android O. I have it running on my Pixel C. But then I think it also have it on my, I can't have the 6P, but I didn't add it to the Pixel XL yet, because the Pixel XL is also my major Daydream development platform, and I don't really want to go. And some people think it runs just as well, but they've had a few glitches, but it does not offer the Daydream 2.0 yet in that build. So I'm going to hold off until that comes available so I can test it out. But I'm really looking forward to this, especially this little feature here, because as you know, I like to show off some of the things that I've been working on, and this will add that ability, because you'll see when I go out and test my previous Sun Temple with the Segway. I built a little Segway, a virtual Segway to move around. You'll see. So a single screen would be fun. So we'll talk about that. So I'm really looking forward to that. All right, move on to my next items. A couple more items in the VR. I thought this is cool. We're coming down to actually creating holographic, and we're not talking HoloLens, which is still something you wear on your face, but essentially having a system. You remember, what was it? Gosh, back when we first started, there was a company who created standard computer-generated holograms that were printed out to film, and then you could use a monochromatic light source in order to enable them, and then they basically popped out. Do you remember that, Chris? Can't think of the company right now, but imagine having a display that can do the same thing. So they've been working on something for mobile devices, so eventually you could have a display that could create something like that. Wouldn't that be kind of neat? So we talked a little earlier about the Buck Rogers experience. Well, we're getting very close to that. So you'll be able to pull out your phone and have something kind of sitting on it. I do have a little video to show, so let me find it here. Here we go. See, it's more of a promotional piece, but yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And obviously, if you can create something that allows you to display it as a flat panel, I don't know how large they could make this, but they showed a cityscape there. I could see this being used for city planning and to show objects that we talked about using fabrication to show off devices, and I'm a big proponent of using VR and augmented reality. So to me, this is the next step. Having this have a hologram of a device that multiple people can surround and look at a component before it's actually fabricated, and then actually fit it to possibly another device. Wouldn't it be kind of cool to have a large layer like car size, so you don't have to have like car shows with actual products out on the floor? They're just all holograms. I don't know. Thinking big, I guess. Okay, so let's see one more item, and then we'll move on to the Print Whisperer, because I know that's what everybody. Oh, actually, that's it. So, Mr. Print Whisperer, let's move on.
Okay. Today, I'm going to talk about my 0.2 millimeter secret. Shh.
What?
It's a 0.2 millimeter secret. Shh. It's so have you ever built an assembly and then 3D printed it and only realized that it doesn't fit together?
Yes. All the time.
Did you remember to add clearance?
Ah, exactly.
So today I want to touch briefly on clearance. So clearance could be defined by the space between two mated objects. So obviously you have one piece and another piece, maybe one fits inside the other piece. Well, if there's no clearance, they're not going to fit together unless you're pounding on them, unless you sand it away. And there's all kinds of different clearance, and engineering fits is what they call it, engineering fits. And you can read all kinds about them and different applications. I put a link to Wikipedia, a great Wikipedia article that kind of goes over engineering fits. But in 3D printing, for most mated parts that I do, I like a clearance of about 0.2 millimeters. That's a really good number for me. I work in metric. I prefer metric. I have Onshape do all the calculations. If I have a client that's working in standard, which is only the knuckleheads in the US and I think one other country worldwide that use standard still. We call it standard, but metric is just a better system, way easier to understand. And I just convert to metric and do all my projects that way. But at 0.2 millimeter clearance, it allows parts to go together really nicely and not fall apart. Parts can rotate and move, but it's not super loose. 0.2 millimeter offset for Boolean operations also works nicely for holding objects but not squishing them. So if you needed to build an iPhone case, it'd be really you could take the measurements off of your iPhone, build that in CAD, build a box around it, do a Boolean operation, and set your offset to 0.2 millimeter. That would work really good. So here's an object I did. It's a golden mean calipers. I drew up an Onshape, and it just fits together. These parts fit together really easily, but they don't fall apart. So, you know, I can piece it all together. Here it is, but it doesn't come apart, you know. So that's a 0.2 millimeter offset. You can always go a little bit tighter. 0.1 or 0.15 millimeter would be a little bit tighter, but this allows it to really easily and not too much friction. Don't have to worry about it breaking the object. So obviously clearance though is only good as tolerance. So in this case, the tolerance of your actual printer, if your printer is over or under extruding and giving you inaccurate prints, this will affect your tolerance, thus affecting your clearance. So however, if you have a printer that's well tuned, and I recommend a 0.2 millimeter offset as a starting point for mated parts that are 3D printed. So 0.2 millimeter is a good number.
Totally agree with you. And I bring into actually the parts that I sent to you, I wanted to be very, very tight because it's framed. So I have some flexibility there, but I want them to lock together. We'll see if that 0.2 magic should have been included in that. That should be, I'll be talking about that in a little bit, but totally agree with you. Now, something that you just mentioned, doing your Boolean operations and having an offset, that is something that's still not available in Fusion 360. And it's because, so I now have to go through and manually, I do either the Boolean or beforehand the Boolean, I have to think about it and add the offset, then do the Boolean. And so you have to keep that in mind. So we use your 0.2 offset, which I think is part of Onshape, and I think it's also part of SolidWorks. It's still not in Fusion 360. So I add a 0.1 to each component, which gives me a final result of 0.2.
Well, you know, and I can give you another tip on another way to do it.
Okay, let's hear it.
Another way to do it, if you need to do a Boolean operation offset, and I've done this when offsets fail, and you need to offset all the surfaces, but the offset feature will fail because the CAD software can't figure it out. One way to do it is to copy that piece in place and do a rough calculation of, so, you know, do a rough calculation of, like, from end to end, your max size of your object. Add 0.2 millimeter, divide that object to see how much you need to scale. So if you have a copied object in place, scale it up by, let's say, 1%. Scale that object up. So you have a copy of the part in place that's 1% larger.
Yep, that's what I did as well.
Use that object to do your Boolean operation, and that's kind of like a little reverse hack that'll get the same object done, or get the same thing done.
Excellent tip, Chris, and it's something that I came to the conclusion as well. But
Yeah.
You're right. But scaling is still, you know, you have to pull out the calculator, make sure that you get the proper scale, because the scale is relative.
And you need to make sure it's in the same place, and it's
right. Yeah. So, but there's a cool thing about Fusion 360. You mentioned about creating a copy in place. They have a feature where you do your Boolean operation, and then you can keep the tools. So it's kind of doing the same thing as it keeps that copy for you. But if you have to scale it, then yes, you do need to make a copy if you want your original component. So great tip there, Chris. Thank you very much. And you know, if you've been doing this for a while and you're wondering why your parts don't fit correctly and you've got to pull out the sandpaper, listen to the print whisperer. He knows what he's talking about. All right, let's move on to some of Mike's rummaging in the tech closet. So first thing I'm going to show, let me jump back to my screen, is this is the latest version talking about 3D items of the ODVR Uplay Dream Shredder with its NFC. Actually, I put some Velcro because I found, and I've got an email to the head of Daydream. I want to be able to use my design as a Daydream equivalent. And even though I can enable the Daydream functionality using the NFC tag, it completely wipes out my QR code, which includes all the specifications for my optics, which are larger, and the curvature is less severe. So I don't need it. And even though it still works with the Daydream NFC tag, it's not perfect. So I can remove it, and then for most application, it works perfectly. You can still use the Daydream controller, but you have to put it into developer mode. And also I found applications like Netflix, you have to have the Daydream. So what I did is I put a little Velcro, and I put on the back of it the actual NFC tag on the back of my new 3M ratchet head adjustment. And so yeah, we're getting close. I've added a little more thickness to the front of this to add some more, it's a little too flexible. And I've also added a band holder here, so you can actually put the Daydream controller, so that's always with it. Right now I have this little Velcro strip, and I can just slip it in there, because you know the problem with any controller is that it's a separate item. And I don't know about you, Chris, but I always lose these things. It's like your remote control. So Daydream depends on that, and without it, you can't use it. In fact, what I found was interesting, one of the other cool features is inside here I have that touch capacitive feature. It's essentially like it's essentially a conductive tape that I wrap around it that extends into the screen, that allows you to basically have cardboard touch capacity sensitivity that you can use. And what that allows me to do is use standard cardboard options. Now, one thing I found is that even when the Daydream environment, the Streets app is still cardboard. So if you bring it up, you can't use your Daydream controller with it. It doesn't work. So luckily I have that little feature, and I can still use it without having to take it off. The other thing is I finally converted this, just like the iPhone version, so that it swivels down. So you have access to the screen, so you can touch it, and then once you're done using a couple of neodymium magnets, it holds it in place, and there you go. So it's cool. The other important thing is it's a frame design, so the body of the phone is open. So I don't have the issues with it locking in heat. So heat dissipation is better with this. So I can run things, some of my demos, like the one I'm going to be showing here just in a moment, using the Sun Temple. It is very processor intensive, and the back really warms up. In fact, I forgot to turn it off, had it running for like an hour, and man, this phone got hot. And one of the features that they add is a sustained performance, but instead of what they do in order to keep that sustained performance so it doesn't clock down as it gets hot, is they literally run the whole thing at a degraded performance. And I found with my design, I don't necessarily have to do that, which gives me a little bit better capability with some of my demos. So yeah, and other than the, we've talked about it before, I've got this locking mechanism using GoPro type locking. So it's like a 3-point adjustment. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up the demo. Let me find my screen. Where is it? I think it's this one. Hello? Hello? Right. The other cool thing is on the back of this, you can have the touch control. So once I have it up, I can just use my touch control or touch ID in order to bring it up. So here we go. I'm going to put it on, guys. So I'm no longer in the show. All right, so now I'm going to activate the controller. Can you see my controller while I'm doing this, Chris?
I can. Your audio sounds horrible, but
how about now?
It's still all it's like crackly.
Yeah, it's probably because of the device being close to it. Okay, can you see my segue? So it's still kind of wonky, but yeah, so what I have found is that if you have a stationary object that you can manipulate, because you're kind of like floating around, a Segway is nothing more than a device that you're stationary, but you can move around in the real world. So it kind of gives you that same illusion. And I'm trying to adjust it so that it kind of works like a Segway, so that you can spin around. So this would be great for like my demo here, where I'm inside the my Sun Temple. And this version will be available for download soon, probably by the end of the weekend once I tweak it. So yeah, you can move around. And I decided not to unwrap it and make it I wanted to make it simple so that the polygon level is low. So I may go back and retexture it so that it actually looks like a Segway. But right now I want to get the movement down. So can you see it, Chris?
Yeah.
And then I can center it. So there, I'm back. So the thing, isn't that kind of neat?
Very unique castle area.
Yeah, this is called Sun. It's one of the demos from the Unreal. So a lot of the Unreal's done a good job of creating these demos that if you want to, for instance, this one uses the reflection. You know, we talked about the reflection spheres. So that's what gives us this great metallic look to it. But the problem is in mobile, especially mobile VR, I've had to dumb down a few things. And also I found that Google VR or Daydream is only OpenGL 2.0. It doesn't even use 3.1, nor can use Vulkan. So the performance is not really where it should be at. But I think they were just trying to gain more frame performance, so the quality is less than what you can get out of 3.1. So I'm a little disappointed with that. If you notice, the shadows aren't as built up. There's some other effects that are limited. But again, any of the effects that you try to bring into a Daydream type experience is going to hamper performance. So it's really, you know, as you may notice, here we're pretty good because I've locked in the number of polygons that are being drawn. So you don't see the screen, but if I go into one of the edges here, you can go see it. You see the black around the edges shift in my screen? That's because it's not keeping up with it. And even though you're only limited about 50 frames per second, trying to keep up with it and the projected technique they use can create some problems if you try to push it. So I'm still working on that, but also working on my little segue here. So let me end it. Let me get into this other room here. We've got a couple more items to show. Here we go. Also, something that you may or not be able to hear is that I do have some spatial sound in here. I have the ocean in the background, and you're wondering. Okay, let me go backwards here. I used to have side movement, but you know it's kind of hard to move a Segway sideways unless you had rotating wheels. So I may have version 2 of the Segway. I don't know. Can you still hear me? Okay, so look at this vista. Isn't that kind of neat?
Wow.
Pretty neat, huh? Now, but watch what happens when I turn around. See how I get the lag?
Yeah.
Because it's trying to draw a lot of faces. And there's a lot of shaders as well in creating this. And so it's very laggy here. So I'm going to have to work on some techniques to kind of fool it. This is where the Seurat technique might be very useful to create the illusion. And I'm hoping Unreal will be one of the engines that supports it. I have a sneaky feeling it will be. So here we go, kind of looking out. And I also took out the trees, which were shader nightmare, so they're gone. But nice little vista, huh? Okay, all right. So that's it. Let me take this off and move into my next item, which is, so if you remember, and thank you, Chris, for trying to, not trying, did, so it should be here tomorrow. So this is, I don't know what I'm going to call it, but this is the Zoom H2N, and I actually have it here in front of me. The Zoom H2N is and I think I talked about it, is a 4-mic recording. It actually records 4 channels that has 4 mics in it. But they did something with the firmware to allow it to actually do a first order ambisonic, which is 4-channel recording, which gives you spatial information front of you, back of you, and off to the sides. It doesn't give you top or bottom. You need a multi-order ambisonic plug-in to do that, and some people have been doing that by just adding additional microphones. But the problem is there is no actual tripod mount on the top, and I wanted to create this as a one large unit so that you can put your Gear 360 or other 360 device on top of it, and also provide a frame so that if you're using it, and thanks to my buddy Chris, the Print Whisperer, he printed it for me and shipped it out. So I should have it tomorrow to try over the Memorial weekend. I'm going to go down to the Portland, what do they call it, Riverfront Fair, which I guess is their open market. So Chris is telling me my audio is bad. Let me see what happens if I turn this off. Okay, how's that, Chris? Is it better?
Mm-mm.
No, I'm still bad?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Sounds like a broken speaker.
Yeah. Interesting. Let's see what else I can do here. How's that? Is that better?
Nope.
Test, test. Still bad?
Yeah. Oh well.
Oh, well, we'll try to get to. Oh, that's bad. Normally, I don't have problems with this. Well, I've noticed sometimes the stream, so I'll get through it really quick. I apologize for the poor sound. Obviously, being the speaker and presenting it. So this will be available for download after I test it this weekend. If all goes well, make some minor tweaks to it. I'll make it as STLs available on Thingiverse as well as Umagine, and also put it on Shapeways. And also, Chris will have it. So if you want to get it printed by our illustrious print whisperer, he might appreciate the extra business there. So on that note, let's kind of move on to, is my quality still poor, Chris?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, I was going to get into the next item here. Maybe if I jump to this, still bad audio?
Yeah.
Let's see. I wonder if oh well. So I was going to get into more spatial audio. It's kind of ironic that I have poor audio when I'm going to talk about spatial audio. So I'll have these in the show notes, and we'll just revisit it next week. We're getting close to the end of the hour anyways. But this is, from Google's perspective, some great tools. I'll just jump through them. There will be links in the show notes that you can learn more about Ambisonic from Google's perspective and how to use it in Adobe Premiere, as well as Reaper, which is the tool I used last week. And then obviously the plugin made by Matthias Chronic-Lochner. Let's actually run that video. Should have good audio, I hope. So let's take a look at that real quick. Where are you, video? Here we go. Now, I highly recommend that you go out to this link and look at it because it actually uses spatial audio, so you can actually experience this for yourself. But he's literally recording this observatory in a multi-order ambisonic using his tools. Can't remember, he's like got 24 microphones, but he records as I'm jumping through this. And here's the actual tool in play. He's using the Reaper, which I just mentioned, which allows you to use a DAW with multiple channels, which is extremely important. Premiere does not have that capability, but if you're using Premiere already for your videos, and they do support 360, I highly recommend it. And I'll actually have a little bit more of a tutorial next week when my audio is better.
Sounds good.
All right, Chris, why don't you sign us off?
Okay. Well, thank you to all of our wonderful news makers, and obviously the MakerFaire. You can get more updates from them at makerfaire.com. I'm sure they'll put the talks on YouTube here. I think they usually put them on, and there's a few that I missed that I can't wait to check out. And we have a bunch more people in our credits. You can check out in the show notes: youtube.com, berkeley.edu, Thingiverse, Science Mag, Spar 3D, and many others. And we will see you next week on All Things 3D.
Bye.